Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Sometimes I'm under a starless sky, but I'm feeling more like dirt. How do I forget so fast who you are and what that's worth? Because there's evidence of you in every corner of this life. So why am I still trying to prove that I don't deserve your time? 'Cause I am yours. Bound to overtake us. If I had to write a story of the greatest loves in time, I would have to sing of you. I'm this branch and you're the vine, and the romance that we have, oh, it's easy by design. I was fortunate I searched the world, it couldn't fill me. Minds empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. And you came along and put me back together. And every desire is not satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all. You still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. There's not a place where mercy and grace will find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn praise into gardens. You turn bones into honey. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you.
There are many ways we collaborate with each other to be the church we're called to be and to serve how we serve. And our contributing financially is one of the most important of those ways. If you want to help fund and sustain what we get to do together, go to crosspoint.org/contribute to see the many simple ways that you can do so. You can even text crosspointenc to 77977 to receive a link to get started now. Thank you for your partnership in the work we do together.
devil was born without a pair of horns. It was you, Jezebel, it was you. If ever an angel fell, Jezebel, it was you. Jezebel, it was you. If ever a pair of eyes promised paradise, deceiving me, grieving me, leaving me blue, Jezebel, it was you. If ever the devil's plan.
Jezebel. So in honor of, or maybe in spite of Women's History Month, I want to dive deep into one of history's most hated women. The name Jezebel, it's been used for over 3,000 years to characterize women who are deemed socially unacceptable, whether they be too ambitious, too clever, have too little filter, or too bold, too opinionated, too sexually desirable, too powerful, too irresistible, too successful, too uncontrollable. Jezebels are women who are just too much. Jezebel references are pejorative, they're derogatory, insulting. Jezebels are femme fatales, morally questionable. Few dare to name their daughters Jezebel anymore. As a baby name, it was considered uncommon. It's ranked 12,675th on the U.S. baby names list for girls. So to be a Jezebel is among society's worst offenses. Interesting that while many characteristics attributed to Jezebel are often celebrated in men, they aren't so much in women. White enslavers used the Jezebel trope as an excuse for their rape, abuse, and exploitation of enslaved Black women. This idea began when European missionaries and explorers interacted with African women who traditionally and practically wore less clothing than their European Victorian counterparts. So the white men made this determination that this wasn't because climate and culture called for less bodily covering, but because African women, and by extension all Black women, must be inherently promiscuous. So the myth went that Black women had a Jezebel nature that made them overtly sexual, immoral, untrustworthy, less resistible, and therefore fair game to white enslavers. And so began this long-standing fiction that white women were chaste and pure, and Black women quite the opposite. There's a lot more that can be said about this, but since we're keeping it PG, or at least PG-13, that's something I'll let you research more on your own. I will simply say, if you Google Jezebel stereotype, make sure you're looking for scholarly articles or ones from historical museums. But suffice it to say that this stereotype is far from dead, and it continues to harm especially Black women. So any non-conforming woman might also be accused of having a Jezebel spirit that needs to be tamed or repented of. But more recently, this Jezebel spirit idea, it's been adopted to mean an actual literal demonic presence that participates in this physical, spiritual warfare on earth and that threatens the American way of life. Although it's not only limited to them, there's a Christian supremacist group, the New Apostolic Reformation, or the NAR, who are strong proponents of this belief. And problematically, many of their high-ranking clergy are actually spiritual advisors at the White House. This group believes that the so-called Jezebel spirit was present over the 2020 election, and that presidential nominee Kamala Harris is under the influence of this Jezebel spirit. Meaning, according to sociologist Cynthia Butler, she's hardcore, terrible, hates men, hates authority, she's non-Christian, she's ambitious, ruthless. She's going to do whatever she wants to do, and is therefore unqualified to serve as president. It seems all the Jezebel bases were covered right there. I probably don't need to say it, but I will. This is not only factually incorrect, but racist and misogynistic. So Jezebel has been sung about, written about, referenced in all areas of pop culture. Referring to someone as Jezebel doesn't require much explanation. We know the type of woman they're talking about. In the Jewish Talmud, Jezebel is used as an example of why men shouldn't follow their wives' counsel, because it'll lead them to hell. But who was Jezebel really? I think there's a lot for all people of all genders to learn from her. I'm sure most of us don't regularly read the books of 1st and 2nd Kings where her story is recorded. And for all the vitriol piled on her, Jezebel was written about more than any other woman in the Bible, Mary and Eve included. There's some small evidence of her existence in archaeology. There's a royal seal that was discovered in the 60s that seems to say something like belonging to Jezebel. Some people believe her story is more of kind of like a historical novel written like a warning to readers about how to avoid personal and political downfall. Now, if Jezebel was an actual person, it's important we remember that her biggest haters are the ones who recorded her story. We do know that Jezebel was a Phoenician princess. She was married at probably around 15 years of age to King Ahab of Israel, and it was a time when royal marriages were still just political ones. Psalm 45 is actually about their wedding, and it seems like it was just as an elaborate occasion as we might imagine a royal wedding should have been. Probably very royal wedding-ish. Everybody was paying attention like we do now. And as a princess of royal birth, Jezebel, she would have been highly trained and educated in culture and foreign and legal affairs. We're actually told in the books of Kings that she wrote her own letters. So we know she was at least literate, which was unusual for women during that time, but perhaps not for royal Phoenician women. Jezebel's Phoenician name was Itha Baal, meaning woman of the Lord or woman of Baal. Baal was a well-known god or a group of gods at that time. However, the Hebrew authors of the stories renamed her Izebel, transliterated Jezebel, meaning woman of dung. So you can kind of tell how the story starts. Now, Phoenicians, of whom Jezebel was one, they were the original Canaanites. So you might remember Canaan from the wilderness stories of the Israelites. Canaan was referred to as the promised land, the destination the Israelites were seeking and promised when they escaped Egypt and then spent 40 years in the desert waiting for. Canaan was called the land of milk and honey. It was an oasis of abundance and flourishing in the surrounding desert landscape. The sea made up one of its borders. Today, you could find it, most of ancient Phoenicia is located in what's modern-day Lebanon and Syria. And so Jezebel was from its famous city, Tyre, or Tyre, which is still one of the oldest and most continually inhabited cities of the world. You can go visit it. Tyre was a popular trade and cultural destination, and it had an especially desirable and expensive export, Tyrian purple, extracted from the glands of this spiny sea snail. And at one time it was so popular, it was worth 3 times its weight in gold. Roman Emperor Nero is said to have refused to wear anything except clothing dipped in Tyrian purple. Greeks eventually gave Canaan the name Phoenicia because of this purple, because they believed it was the color of the wings of the phoenix, their mythological immortal bird who was continually reborn out of its own ashes. It was a big deal. So another fun fact about Phoenicia, our English alphabet can be traced back to the Phoenicians. So I could go on, but the bottom line was that Princess Jezebel was from a wealthy, well-known, important, sophisticated place. Very unlike the desert landscape of her husband's kingdom. You can imagine the culture and geography shock Jezebel must have experienced when she moved to her new kingdom. King Ahab was the king of Israel. It was smaller, a less significant nation. The biblical story portrays Ahab as kind of a pushover, this kind of puppet king to his queen consort Jezebel. But there's actually historical evidence from like papyrus and stone documents that have been found that Ahab was a formidable king who helped bring Israel to the world stage, partly maybe because of his marriage to Jezebel, who was from this very prominent and important place. It's indicated that Ahab had significant armies and that he wasn't afraid to use them. So as a Phoenician, Jezebel was a devoted follower of the gods of her own culture and family, the Baal or the Baals. Jezebel is hated today for her perceived promiscuity, but early on, she was hated because she was blamed for turning her husband and his entire kingdom away from the Israelite god Yahweh, and for her refusal to abandon her gods and convert. But actually, even biblical evidence suggests something very different. Israel had always struggled with the mandate of monotheism from their inception. It was an ongoing issue, not something that was started by some Phoenician princess. There's actually no evidence that her husband, King Ahab, ever turned away from Israelite God at all, at least not completely. Ahab fought his battles in Yahweh's name. And Ahab and Jezebel's children were named with names that honored the Hebrew God. Their first son's name meant he who holds Yahweh close. And their second, Yahweh is exalted. And their daughter's name meant Yahweh is on high. So it seems like Ahab, at least, still held the Israelite God front and center. Now, Ahab did set up temples for his wife's gods outside the city limits, and Jezebel brought priests and priestesses to fill and care for them. This was probably an arrangement that was in their marriage contract. But this was actually also nothing out of the ordinary, and it fell well within Israelite law. King Solomon himself was infamous for providing religious temples for his non-Hebrew wives. Ahab merely followed in the tradition of the kings before him. Jezebel may have been framed, but she was not totally innocent. She was strategic and cunning and capable. She was also a really loyal wife. Her faithfulness to her husband would ultimately be this linchpin in her downfall, the excuse for her execution. So we're told this story that King Ahab wanted land, and he wanted a vineyard owned by a man named Naboth. Well, Naboth refused. He refused this business deal on the grounds that the land was ancestral and he wanted to keep it in the family. Jezebel, ever the loving wife who wanted to please her husband and who was apparently well-versed in legal matters, decided she was going to take matters into her own hands and acquire the land for Ahab. So she wrote letters within the legal bounds and falsely accused Naboth and his sons of crimes of blasphemy and had them executed so that Ahab could have the land. And there was a bit of a cover-up involved. Problematic. Elijah, the prophet, heard about this Naboth incident and prophesied that Jezebel's punishment for her crimes would be her violent death, where she would be eaten by dogs. You probably call Elijah Jezebel's arch nemesis. As a prophet, Elijah was tasked with reminding the Israelites to turn from their wicked ways and to be singularly focused on their God. But it actually turns out that the best example Israel had of uncompromising faith was found in their immigrant queen. So was it really her fault people were drawn to her gods? She was just continuing a family tradition, right? Well, in the mind of the writers and the prophets, yes, Jezebel was solely to blame. I mean, after all, we know that Jezebels are just too hard to resist. So, in one particularly epic story that gets to kind of the crux of Elijah and Jezebel's tumultuous relationship, Elijah basically challenges the queen's priests to an epic duel. It's kind of Mr. Beast-like competition fashion. And he called the priests of Baal to the mountaintop to challenge them to see which god, Baal or Yahweh, would prove themselves and light an altar with fire from heaven. So the story goes that the priests of Baal did everything they could think of to get the attention of their gods, dancing and praying and chanting. They even did self-harm. There wasn't a spark of lightning, not even a little static electricity. So then after taunting the priests, Elijah was telling them maybe their god was sleeping or going to the bathroom. Elijah made this huge show of soaking the altar in water, praying loudly, and Yahweh came through with a bolt of fire from heaven that left everything charred. There wasn't a drop of water or stone left. And then, as everybody stood there shocked at what had gone, depending on your perspective, either terribly right or terribly wrong, Elijah called for the execution of all of Jezebel's priests. When Jezebel heard about that, when she heard about the slaughter of her priests, she was, as you might imagine, upset. She vowed to kill the prophet. 1 Kings 19 records her response. It says, "Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, 'May the gods deal with me be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. Elijah was scared of Jezebel. Apparently, he believed Yahweh had power enough for a fire and light show, but couldn't be trusted in the bodyguard department. In the Greek version of this text, which is called the Septuagint, Jezebel is recording as having also said, "If you're Elijah, so I am Jezebel." In other words, you think you're something, but you've never met me. Elijah had met his match, which gave the writers yet another reason to hate Jezebel. She imagined herself to be equal to or even superior to a man, and a prophet of Yahweh, no less. The audacity, the nerve, the brazenness. Jezebel was Elijah's perfect anti-hero, the Joker to Elijah's Batman, the Thanos to Elijah's Avengers. And let's not forget that Jezebel's story was written down long after the events were believed to have transpired. It's important. It was after the kingdom of Israel had actually split in two. There was the northern kingdom, Israel, with the 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom, Judah, with the remaining 2. So by the time this story was written down, the northern kingdom of Israel had fallen in epic fashion, and the southern kingdom was close to it. It was about to fall. The writers of Jezebel's story were from the remaining southern kingdom of Judah, and they held generations of resentment toward their northern fallen siblings. They needed a morality story to warn the South, their southern family, how close they were to following in their northern siblings' footsteps. They wanted to give the South a clear reason why the North had fallen so they didn't let it happen to them. Why had they fallen, they said? Because they turned away from their God. And why had they turned away from their God? Well, because Jezebel. Jezebel became the totem for all that the kingdom of Judah was supposed to hate. They wanted nothing redeeming to be remembered about her. They did a pretty good job. Now, although promiscuity is one of the main things Jezebel is characterized for today, there's actually nothing in the text that indicates she ever acted sexually. This idea comes from some misunderstandings. One is a misreading of some verses in the book of Revelation. But the main reason Jezebel is tied to sexual promiscuity is because of the events surrounding her death. And let's be honest, the quickest way to ruin a woman's reputation is to over-sexualize her. So Jezebel's death was brutal and gory, even for a sacred book that's filled with extreme violence. It was over the top. So a few years after Jezebel's husband, remember King Ahab's death, the new king, Jehu, set out to destroy the house of Ahab. He made his way to Jezebel, and she caught wind of it, and she prepared herself. She heard Jehu was coming, and 2 Kings says this: "She put paint on her eyes and adorned her head and looked through a window. Then, as Jehu had entered the gates, she said, 'Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?'" She purposely actually calls Jehu the wrong name. It's the name of another usurper. And he looked up to the window and said, "Who's on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. These would have been her staff. Then he said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down, and some of her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses, and he trampled her underfoot. And when he had gone in, he ate and he drank. And then he said, "Go now, see to this accursed woman and bury her, for she was the king's daughter." So they went to bury her, but they found no more than her skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. When Jezebel heard Jehu was coming for her, she put on her best dress and her crown, and she did her makeup and her hair, and she bravely awaited her fate at her window. Now, Jezebel's putting on makeup and clothing and doing her hair has, of course, been used as various justifications to mandate that women not wear makeup or cut or fix their hair, because that is a slippery slope into Jezebel's ways. But Jezebel didn't do her face and her hair and put on her best jewelry in order to seduce her killers, her executioners, who were also her staff, because they were eunuchs. Seduction would have gotten her nowhere. No, the eyeliner and the earrings, they were acts of political power. Jezebel, even in the face of her impending doom, was still a classy lady. She was a queenly one, and she would, as Dr. Will Gaffney writes, die as she had lived, preserving her sense of self. She would go out with her head held high and with dignity. Jezebel left the world as she lived in it. Competent, unwavering queen. Although she actually clearly acted as a queen, and she was likely recognized openly as one, the biblical text never calls Jezebel queen, which is yet another insult from the writers. So, as Jezebel's staff pushed her out the window, one of them called her a harlot. But according to scholar Leslie Hazelton and many others, this wasn't meant in strictly a religious sense. This was strictly religious harlotry. Because remember, throughout its history, Israel was constantly being rebuked by the prophets for their unfaithfulness to Yahweh. They were supposed to practice monolatry. This isn't monotheism, which is the belief in one God, that only one God exists. Monolatry is the belief that although multiple gods exist, there is one that is the best and the highest and should be singularly worshipped. The Israelites never denied the existence of other gods. That wasn't a requirement. They were just supposed to be faithful to one, to Yahweh. But they kept forgetting or ignoring that, and they would fall over and over again into these religious practices of many of the cultures around him, the worship of more than just Yahweh. This was religious adultery. The Israelites practiced religious harlotry. Jezebel, on the other hand, remember, she refused to abandon her gods or worship any other gods. She remained absolutely faithful to Baal. Her harlotry was that she wasn't monogamous with Yahweh. One of the writer's biggest beef with Jezebel seems to be that she was unrelenting in her faithfulness to both herself and to her own gods, something that was not true of the writer's own people. Jezebel was faithful to both her man and her gods. She wasn't the type of harlot we think of. So after Jezebel's violent, bloody death, the executioner King Jehu grabbed some dinner, then sent his servants back to retrieve Jezebel's body. But all that was left was her skull and her feet and the palms of her hands. The rest of her had been eaten by dogs, just as Elijah had predicted. Women like Jezebel, even the widows of kings, did not get to retire or exit gracefully. There was no question Jezebel was finished, and the writers and the winners got to tell her story. Jezebel represented everything Israel was not. Faithful, loyal, uncompromising. But it's so much more fun to tell a story of a wicked harlot queen who's thrown from her balcony. Hazelton calls this a case of schadenfreude, delight in the misfortune of others, especially those we don't like. Because a fall is so much more interesting than a rise. This is the story we prefer to tell. But truly, there is much to be learned from Jezebel, and I just don't think it's what most of the internet articles and traditionalists have told us. I don't think Jezebel's life is a warning to beware of demonic spirits, or for women not to wear makeup, or for women to be seen, but not too scantily, and definitely not heard. I think that's much too shallow an interpretation. Jezebel's life has things to teach all of us. My takeaways? First and foremost, Jezebel never pretended to be something she wasn't. She was 100% true to herself, loyal to the one she loved, and faithful to the end in her beliefs. I can't always say the same thing for myself, can you? How many times have I lessened myself for one reason or another? or pretended in order to avoid possible imaginary ramifications? How many times have I made excuses for not making myself or those I love a priority? Jezebel knew who she was and she didn't apologize for it. And although she was sometimes misguided in her attempts, she prioritized those she loved, those most important to her. Perhaps this is something we should learn to practice more ourselves, and maybe we should learn to celebrate it more when we see it in others. Second, Jezebel was the object of the biblical writers' vitriol and fear. She was really just this representation of what they really feared and hated. They hated unfaithfulness and disloyalty to their God. They were disappointed, they were scared about the failing of their nation, and they needed a scapegoat for their own shortcomings. Jezebel was an easy target. If they told their version of Jezebel's story well enough and loud enough and long enough, they might be able to hide the truth of where the blame really should have been placed. Or maybe there was no one to point the finger at all. Sometimes it just feels better to have someone else to blame. And I can be uncomfortably guilty of that too. Rather than own up to my own mistakes, I'd rather find someone or somewhere else to point the finger. Rather than to blame the system or the movement, or better yet, try to find solutions, it's much easier to take my feelings out on particular and specific people, whether they had anything to do with it or whether they're misguided or not. For example, I can't stand the guy with the big blow-up president and all the signs in his yard that's in my neighborhood. He is all that is wrong in the world right now. I've actually never met him. I actually don't even know if he is a he. But that person has become the personification that makes everything in my stomach turn right now. It doesn't have depth, or that person doesn't have any humanity. Same goes for that car with the bumper sticker I don't like. Of course they didn't put their turn signal on. Of course, because that's the kind of people they are. Well, what if we reminded ourselves that those who irk us the most, they're also someone's child, someone's loved one. We still might not think they're right. They might be incredibly wrong, but it might keep us from throwing them out a window and calling them harlots. Third, the centuries have purposefully misunderstood Jezebel. Some of us know what's that like. We know what that is like, to be misunderstood and not have the means or the opportunity or even the energy to explain ourselves. Have you ever been misunderstood? Have you ever misunderstood anyone? Accidentally or on purpose? Refused to hear their side because you've already solidified your own conclusions? Sometimes it's so much easier to believe the worst, isn't it? It's harder to get hurt that way. Who is misunderstood in your life? Has there ever been someone in your life that you believed one thing about and you turned out to be completely wrong? Who are the misunderstood in our society? But what if, like Jezebel, we decided to be truer to ourselves, to be faithful to what we know is true, and to be unwavering in our standing for it, to make those we love more of a priority? What if, like Jezebel, we recognized our worth, and even in the most terrifying of moments, we choose to believe and act like we're royalty? What if, women in particular, the next time you're called a Jezebel, rather than being insulted, you respond with "thank you" instead? What if we work our hardest to understand, to dig deeper, rather than to perpetuate misunderstanding? What if we don't accept things at face value, but ask another question and another? What if we commit to remembering the humanity and the most difficult of people? Just like Jezebel, it might not make them innocent, but it might help us remember our humanity and theirs. Those are my takeaways from the life of Jezebel. What are yours? In the very least, I hope whenever you hear her name, you think about things a little differently. Thanks.
If you would like to know more or get connected to Crosspointe, go to crosspointenc.org. If you're in need of care or assistance, go to crosspointe.org/care. And welcome home.